guys, it's Marina with Artworthy Life, where I teach Christ-centered art journaling that gets you into God's Word every day. And in today's episode, we are going to be painting a beautiful rose in my art journal from start to finish. So if you are interested in painting floral paintings with watercolors or roses or anything like that, I hope you will stay tuned for this episode, watch to the end, and keep it out for future episodes throughout the month of May, because we are going to be painting a lot of roses. I'm very excited about it, and it's just such a beautiful subject to paint. You can paint it a lot of different ways. Roses are just gorgeous, and they add so much to other paintings. You can do a lot with them. So our theme inside the Artworthy Journal Club is roses for this month, Jesus the Rose of Sharon. And even though that's not quite the right flower, technically, we're still going to go with roses. I think it's going to be really fun. All right, but of course, I always like to get us started on the right foot, so I want to read some scripture to get us going. So I'm going to read a verse from 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3, and here's what it says. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort. I'm just going to read that last part a little bit again. The Father of mercies and God of all comfort. I just really love that verse. Felt like I needed to read it today. A lot of us are going through some crazy stuff. The world is wild. Family stuff is hard. Church stuff is hard. Political stuff is hard. You know, health stuff is hard. And God is the God of all comfort. And I love that it says all comfort. Like, you can get all of your reassurance and comfort from one source, and that is God. In fact, many people try to let other people in their lives fill that spot, and I'm guilty of it. I think everybody does it at some point. They either try to use their children to fulfill that need, or their husband to fulfill that need, or siblings to fulfill that need. Really good friends, in my case, sometimes friends or family, or even like teachers can try to fulfill that need of comfort. Like when you need to be comforted, you go to those people, and that's something that God is supposed to do for us. He's supposed to be our comfort, so that no matter where we're at in life or where we end up, we could be isolated completely on an island, either metaphorically or literally, and God is capable and will, if we allow him, be our total source of comfort. So I just love that verse. I need to probably, write it on my wall to remember. But I just think it's wonderful that he can be 100% our fulfillment in every stage of life. Is so great. So I hope that's encouraging to you and gets your morning off to a great start. If it's morning for you, I know for some of you, you're on the East Coast, not quite morning anymore. But go ahead and let me know where you're watching from as you jump on. And I'm going to just jump right into this rose painting. Now, this is a pink rose that I found a photo of on Canva. I've talked about Canva before, but you can find reference photos all over online. I love to use Canva because I pay for that as a subscription. So if I end up wanting to show the reference photo, I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about copyright issues or whatever. But that's what I used for this. I used it as a tracer, actually, rather than freehanding it. And I just wanted to go a little faster. So if you're wanting some really beautiful things in your art journal and you don't have a lot of time to, painstakingly take your time freehanding something, consider just tracing things. A lot of times that can give just a gorgeous effect, and you don't have to worry about being like the absolute best artist ever. And actually, I've said this before. Hi, Tori. She's in Oklahoma. Oh, wow. I don't know if I've had somebody watching from Oklahoma in a while. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I just want to give you this little snippet. I've said this before, but some of the best artists in history, like, Leonardo da Vinci type people, people that we put up on posters as those are the fine artists of our history. Many of them used the equivalent of a tracer. Either they would lay something over top of their artwork and trace it, or things like that when they were doing murals and stuff like that. So just so you know, if you use a tracer, you are still a legitimate artist. And that's just an encouragement to me. It makes me feel legit. And sometimes I freehand things. I do freehand quite a bit, but I just want to encourage you, when you're learning to draw, it's easier to start with something and learn based on what the shape looks like. And eventually, if you trace something long enough, you'll get the idea of what the shape is in your head and you'll be able to paint it. Okay, so I'm going to paint this little pink flower. I think it's the sweetest little shape. And I'm going to try to just keep it simple because I want it to be something that you can paint in like one setting. So I'm going to mix up crimson and let's see if you guys can see this mixing up. Okay, I'm going to try that. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Let's try this one. Maybe it'll do it. I'm still working on it. They changed up some of the things I do for the screen. So, do I have my technology working? Okay, I'll just go back to this one. Okay, we'll just do it that way. You guys can still see this, so I think it's okay. We're going to mix up a nice neon pink with crimson. I use the Komorebi color chart. Let me go ahead and put my supplies on. Here are the supplies I typically use. Komorebi Mozart watercolor set, and then I use the Master's Touch brushes from Hobby Lobby unless otherwise stated, which in this case I'm actually using the long round Princeton Velvet Touch brush that I picked up, size 10, not too long ago. So I like to use that crimson and neon pink because it brightens up that pink just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is start with just a really watered down version of this color. So let me back this camera up just a touch so that you guys can see a little bit more of my desk. I want you to be able to see the palette while I'm painting so you can see where I'm pulling color from. There we go. I think that worked. All right. So I'm just going to use a watered down version of this pink. And we're going to start with one of the bigger petals right here and just color it in with light pink. Just fill the whole thing in. So I've already drawn it out. It doesn't really need to be drawn because it's already in there. So I'm just basically coloring this in, and that's another reason a tracer comes in handy. So once I get the color in there, I'm just going to dry my brush off and make sure this isn't too wet, but I do want it to stay wet because I'm going to do what's called the wet in wet technique, which I've talked about before. And this just consists of dropping in color while your page is still wet, and I'm just taking that more pigmented pink and dropping it in to those little gaps right there. And I'm just going to let that kind of bleed out into the edge of that petal. And I'm going to keep that same technique going all the way around the flower. But what I want to do is avoid painting near where I've just painted because I don't want to bleed into a petal that's still drying. So I'm going to let that petal over there dry, and I'm just going to work over in this area. So I'm going to use a real light pink over here. I just want to keep it super, super light. I'm even going to like sweep up some of the color so it's not so heavy on the pink on the outside. These outer petals are going to be the lightest of all. So I'm going to keep them nice and light. And I'm just going to do a little tiny bit of shading near the edge of this other petal where there might be a little shadow. And I'm just kind of like glancing at my reference photo here and there to make sure I'm putting the shading where it actually is showing up. And it's mostly like right here. Okay, and is this one still a little wet? This one's still a little bit wet, so I think I can drop in just a tiny bit of shading right along the edge there. But that one really doesn't need a whole lot because it's on the outside of the petal. Okay, now I'm going to keep moving around. So I'm going to come over onto this petal here with some light pink, because I want to not touch the other petal that I just worked on. Now this one is slightly touching this petal here, but there's not a lot going on in this corner, so I'm not too worried about the colors mixing. If they do, we'll just call it a happy accident and we'll let that go. Okay, So I'm just filling that in all pink like that. And then taking a little bit of my more pigmented color, I'm just going to drop that into the shadowy areas. And while I'm filling this in, you may not be able to tell, but I'm really not worried about it being perfectly colored in. You know, you might have the habit of like really filling in every area, but I don't really mind if there's some white spaces or some little gaps that are not quite filled in. I just want to make sure that the basic colors are still there, but I don't need it to be very, very filled in perfectly. I'm going to do a little bit more shadow right here in this corner. So if you have a reference photo, you can just kind of follow where the shadow is showing up. There's a little bit here and maybe a little here, kind of where the petals are starting to curl. I'm seeing a little bit more shadow. Okay, now I'm just going to lightly check and see that petal is dry. So now I can paint near that petal and not worry about it bleeding into the other parts of the flower. So I'm going to start on this petal out here in the back. And this one has almost no shading whatsoever. It's just a super bright, light petal. I'm just going to paint that in really smoothly. And there's just the tiniest bit of shading right here. So I'll go ahead and do that and let that just kind of fade into the rest of the flower. Now, watercolor is very unique. If you haven't used watercolor before, it's a little different than acrylic or even oil paints. And I haven't used oil paints very much, but I've done acrylic a lot. And when you're working with acrylic, you're really just layering. And sometimes you blend a little on the page, but really you're layering color. Whereas watercolor, you're kind of creating these little pools of color. You can use watercolor a little bit like acrylic if you want to, but it doesn't layer the same way. So you're wanting to add color in while it's wet or while it's still active and get all that color in there before it dries. And sometimes you can come back over with some other color, but really you can only go light colors and then darker layers. So you're always thinking about, what do I want the final product to look like? And you're working with that final picture in mind the entire time. So unlike acrylic where you can come back and work over it if you need to a point, you really don't do that with watercolor. You think about the final project, get it kind of mapped out, and then hit the page with paint. And it's just a unique approach, and I think it's really fun. It's something that you kind of have to get used to when you first start working with watercolor, but it's really fun and it makes it interesting and kind of exciting. Let's see, am I missing any comments? Good morning, Daniel. So good to see you on. Hey, Grandma, how are you? I'm so glad I got to talk to you yesterday. It's fun that you get to see this one today because it is the start of our month of roses, and I'm really excited about all of the roses that are coming up. There's going to be a lot. I don't know if I'll be able to do as many as I even want to, but I'm really excited to start. Okay, so coming in here again, I've checked to make sure these two petals are dry, and now I can come in with light pink again right here in this corner. And this is just a really light petal as well. The light is hitting it and making it almost white in the reference photo. So I'm just going to come along this edge, do a little shading. And sometimes the shading you're adding isn't really about giving that petal shading. Sometimes it's about making the next petal that's in front of it show up just a tiny bit more. So you like to go along the edges of that petal, especially, I say you or me, whatever, we like to go a little heavier along the edge of that petal, and that just really helps it stand out a little bit more. So I'm just dropping in a little bit of color there, and that's going to help that bleed out into there. Now the next area I can work is over here because that's nice and dry over there. So I'm going to go ahead and go with that light pink again. Just kind of eyeballing that. It looks like I was supposed to bring this petal over here. So I'm just going to paint that in a little bit and bring that petal over. Just going to kind of blend that together. And now I'll in with that lighter pink. So I'm just going to use a real light pink on this petal, lots of water. And my palette doesn't have a true pink. It has red and then like a neon pink. And so whenever I do pink with this particular palette, I typically start with red and then water it down a lot. Sometimes I'll add white depending on how thick I want the paint to be. But usually it's just a watered down red, especially when I'm just doing loose flowers like this. And then I'll just let the color kind of dry into that really nice pink. So this is the edge of a petal right here, and I don't really want it to be dark at all. I want it to stay real light so that later when I add the shading in from the other sections, it doesn't just totally disappear. So I'm going to leave that as is and grab some more light pink. So I'm just adding water again to my palette, and then I'm going to work wherever it feels dry enough to work. And I think this area right here is working really well. It's already kind of dry. So I'm going to keep that really light. Now there is just some sections in here that are almost totally white. So I'm just going to keep that pink very, very light, like crazy light right there. And then drop in a little darker pink in this corner. Again, this is about making these two petals that are sitting right next to each other show up a little bit better. Grandma says, very excited to see your work in progress. Love roses. Have a good day and always. Oh, thank you so much. I love you. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to bring this over so you guys can see where I'm mixing color a little bit more. And let me know if that's not showing up super well on the page for you. So I'm just going to take my darker reddish pink, and I'm still just using those same two colors. So it's amazing how much, it's another thing I like about watercolors, it's amazing how much variation in color you can get just by adding water. So I'm just letting that be a slightly different pink. I think I'm going to start going a little darker in these corners. And again, I'm just thinking about the end product. I'm going to need some darker reds in there to make that, to draw your eye to the center of that rose. It's going to need to be a little darker. So I'm going to start adding darker pigments. And really, it's not darker color. It's just more pigmented. So I'm just grabbing a little bit more color and putting it into the palette, a mixture of that crimson and neon pink. And I'm just not adding as much water to those. Okay, let's see what's next. This one is a little bit, I think that's dry enough now. So I'm going to water this down and just come in here. And now I'm going to start bringing in a little bit more color. So actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to do all these light areas first so that I don't get heavy-handed and start really bringing in dark colors yet. Okay, so I'm going to come around here with this light pink, do this petal out here. And at this point, I'm going to start leaving just a little white rim around the outside edge of that petal. Not super big, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave it white because in the photo, it's like really white. So I'm going to drop in some red around that edge. Not very much right there, but just a little bit more kind of in this corner. Where there's going to be a little bit more pigment happening. I'm just going to drop in a little bit more. So I'm checking my reference photo, and as I'm looking at the color, I'm just going, how dark do I need to go in this area to really bring out the center of that flower? And it looks like it goes pretty dark in this area. So I'm just going to start adding some real deep reds. And I need to add a little pink to that. Can you see how that color, isn't that beautiful, how that color just starts to really get rich? Now I'm going to grab a touch of carmine, which is a darker red. And with that deep, deep red, I'm just going to barely touch the center of that to give it a nice shadow there. And it seems like we're going really dark, but when we paint light colors, we need some dark colors to offset those so that they'll really pop. So it's important that you don't shy away from your darker colors so that your light colors show up and look happy. So let's see. Okay, we need to do a lighter area. So I'm going to try to work. Okay, I'm going to work in these darker areas down here until this area dries so that I'm not bleeding into other colors. So with the same hue of red, or I should say value of red, I'm going to come up underneath this little petal here. So this will be actually the back side of that petal. And I'm just going to drop in some darker red there. Right in that little corner. Needs to be a little bit more pigmented. My color's a little too watery right now. So I'm going to get a little more pigment on my brush. That way it doesn't dry lighter than I want it to. I want it to be pigmented enough that it's going to be the color that I put down. Just like that. And then I'm going to get a little bit more. I think I'm going to sweep up a little bit of that color so it's not quite so red. I'd like that to be a little pinker, I've realized. It comes out a little further. Looks pretty good. I think it's a little darker here than I want it to be, so I'm going to take some water and just sweep up that edge a little bit. And by sweep, I just mean I'm taking a clean, wet brush and I'm actually pulling color off the page so that that area on the left is a little lighter. Now I'm going to take that same mixture of red and pink and come over up underneath this petal here. And I'm going to just get that all across there, nice and pink. So you can tell it's like a coloring page. So if you just have a reference photo and you use it as a tracer, you can just look at your reference photo and just start painting where you see shadow and where you see color and all of that. And it comes together really nicely. I'm going to just drop in some darker shadow down here at the bottom, which in order to make that darker, I'm really just getting more pigmented red and letting that bleed out into the other colors, just kind of dropping it in with the tip of my brush. Now notice I have yet to switch brushes. And when I first started this page, I would always kind of pick on myself that I would forget to switch brushes. And it's really true. I get going and I forget, and then I'm like working with a huge brush when I should really be working with a detail brush. But I will commend the makers of this brush because it's truly like a grab one brush and paint your whole painting type of brush, because you can get such a fine tip with it. So I can go across a whole area or I can go across a small area, and I don't feel like I have to switch brushes when I'm using that. And if you missed it earlier, this is a Princeton Velvet Touch Long Round number 10. And I really like it. It works very well for what I use it for. Okay, here's another little petal. I'm just painting the edge of it, the underside of it right now. Filling that in with a darker red. Now this one doesn't need to be as dark as the other two I just painted, so I'm going to make sure that stays a little lighter and just drop in shadow over here on the left. Maybe just kind of like in that corner so that it shows up a little better. And all I'm doing is waiting for this top area to dry. So now it looks like that's dry. I'm just kind of working where it's not wet currently. And now, let's see, I'm just going to kind of look at the reference photo a little bit. Okay, and it looks like this area needs to be a darker pink. So I'm going to do almost the same red that I just used on that last petal. Just drop that in a little bit darker pink there. And then on this right corner, I'm just going to grab a little bit darker red, a little bit more pigmented on my brush again. Whenever you're dropping color in, typically you don't want to drop a watery color in. You want to drop pigment in, heavier pigment, in other words, just like almost straight from the palette, because that, if you drop in watery color on top of water, like if you're doing wet and you drop in water, you're basically just adding more water and it's just going to spread out. So think about how much water is already on the page. If there's plenty of water, you don't want to add more water. You just want to add color. So you go to your palette and you get your brush wet, but really not that wet at all. And you just kind of like activate the color in your palette by scrubbing it around with your brush, get a lot of pigment on your brush, and then just drop that right into your color. It's a really fun technique, or onto your page. Okay, I'm going to use a light pink now and just add some super light white pink to these petals in the center. And these petals are very, very light. So I'm just gonna do a little swirl in the center. This one comes all the way around, looks like. And then they do get darker as they get to the center, but I'm going to let that dry a little before I do more of that because I don't want it to bleed in again. So now I'm just going to kind of work on these petals out here. This one looks a little too light, so I'm just going to add a little pink to that. And this one's not filled in yet, so I'm going to use some light pink and fill that in. The edge of this one's not filled in, so I'll do that. Now I'm going to use a more pigmented red, and I'm going to go up underneath this petal right here. So this is the bottom side of that petal. So you kind of see a pattern where the petal curls, we're adding light pink and keeping it super light, almost white. And then on the underside of the petal, we're adding that darker pink. And that creates the bottom side of the petal, which is really beautiful and fun. I'm going to grab a little bit of my carmine because there's a nice dark corner right here. I just need a darker red to get that to happen. So I'm just grabbing a tiny bit. The carmine is a little bit more purple than I want it to be for something like this, but it does work well in super small quantities to create a shadow, so that's really nice. It's number 18 on this palette. Hi, Terry. Good morning. Are you enjoying this rose? This is kind of different. I'm liking getting to do another rose. I am trying to do a different way. Oh, that's what I was wanting. There we go. There we go. I wish I had been able to do that earlier. So let me bring this down so you guys can see a little closer. That's what I was going for. I really wanted to. I'm trying to get this shadow out of your way. Sorry, I just got home from Tennessee and I am getting back into my little tiny studio here. And so I'm still getting used to what the best setup is. Right, I think that works. I think that works. The best lighting. Look at that flower, how it's coming together. I think that's really beautiful. So you can see the petals are showing up really nicely, and the white of the curls of the petals is especially nice. It's curling under like that. Okay, so now what we need to do is start adding those deeper colors. Draw your eye to the center of the flower. And let's see. So we have another little back of a petal right here. So I'm going to do that one nice and dark here. And we already have a shadow here on that petal. So I want to make sure this petal goes a little darker than that one so that it definitely shows up as something different than that one right there. And that's dark enough to do that. And now we just need to follow these little curves here in the center. They're like little tiny half moon shapes, really small. And I'm just going to add a little bit of that carmine again right there in the shadow. Make sure we're pulling some of those darkest colors in. We'll do another little loop in the center, but I'm really not even going to paint all the detail that's in the center of this flower because there's a lot of detail there and I'm not wanting it to be that intense. So that's probably detailed enough. Maybe do a little bit on the edge. And kind of add a little bit of pink there. That's probably good enough. Just going to do a nice shadow on the edge of this petal to make that one behind it show up nicely. And I'm just kind of adding some darker colors to make the middle of that show up. Okay, so the center of that flower looks good to me. I think I'm just going to leave it as is. Now I'm going to pull in some darker colors. So I'm going to grab a bigger brush and I'm going to do the background kind of abstract. I'm going to pull some of this color around. I'm just wetting my palette because I don't have a huge palette right now. So I'm just going to not worry about that there's some pink already on it. And I'm going to put grass green into my palette. And I'm using a size 24 round Master's Touch brush. This is a super inexpensive brush. It came in a set of 4 for like $10 regular. And I got it when it was 50% off for $5. So super, super cheap set from Hobby Lobby, but works really well. It's a great beginner set. It's my favorite beginner set. So I highly recommend that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this deep green mixed up over here. And then on the other side of my palette, I know there's not a huge palette, but on the other side of this tiny little palette, I'm going to have some Payne's Gray, which is a real light kind of, I'm not light, I'm sorry, a real blue kind of gray. And I'm also going to even grab let's see, how do I want to do that color? I'm wanting a light blue. I think I'm going to use azurite blue. Let me clean this side of my palette up a little bit. And if you're watching this and I'm going fast, feel free to come back later and watch the replay. You can always watch the replays. They're posted after I'm done, and you can pause me and then catch up, and it's really up to you what pace you want to go. So what I'm going for is a color I'm not getting. So I think I'm gonna dive in and do neon blue. What I'm wanting is a real bright blue, and I'm not getting the color I want with the colors that I have. So I'm gonna grab neon blue and neon green and mix them together and get a nice clear, slightly teal color actually is what I'm going for. I'm just gonna water that down a lot and use it as the base color for my background. So let me make sure you guys can see all of that. Terry says, looking very pretty, love roses. Did you see the photos I sent? Oh, I will have to check. I don't remember if, was it on Messenger? I'll have to check. Tell me where it's at and I'll double check that I can see it. All right, so what we're gonna do is do the background here with just some really cloudy, beautiful brush strokes. Let me erase this pencil line so there's no smudges. And we'll just be careful to come right up to the edge of the rose, but not paint into the rose. So I'm gonna do the edge of this rose, really pretty blue. And for this background, I'm not going to leave any white, so it's just going to all be filled in. There might be white on the edges, but not where the color is, in other words. Okay, so I'm just going to start pulling that out from the flower. I know that looks weird right now, but I'm going to be working really quickly to get this all painted around, around the flower petals, and I'm just going to pull that color out while it's wet. So I'm going to keep my cord is trying to fight me. Keep my page really wet while I'm working. Bring that color all the way out to the edges. And down here, whoops, I'm leaving a little bit of a margin, but a loose margin, just kind of coming up to the edge and stopping short of it. And I'm going to be working kind of quickly so that I can drop some other color in before this is fully dry. So it's a little hard because you have to go quickly around the petals when you're trying to be super careful. But if you just kind of use the edge of your brush and real quickly outline your petals. Oops, I'm going to use that light blue. And bring it all the way down to the edge. I'm running out of time. My page is drying. It's like a marathon. Here we go, all the way around. And if I wasn't trying to keep this straight for you guys, I would turn my page. I say that a lot. You really just want to work however your hand is most comfortable. So my hand is not exactly comfortable at that angle, and it makes it a little hard to control the brush. So I would highly recommend that if you are doing this, especially when you're trying to paint quickly, that you just go ahead and turn the page. I don't mean turn to the next page. I mean turn the angle of your book so that you can paint at an angle that's comfortable for your hand. Okay, so now that that's all wet, I'm going to grab these darker colors I've already mixed up and drop them in while it's wet. The cool thing is it's wet, so the color is only going to go where you put the water. It's not going to go anywhere else. So you can just drop in color and it'll run right up to the edge of that flower, and you don't have to border it perfectly like you did the first time around. Just going to kind of add some darker colors. What I'm doing is I'm adding some of those darker greens, that Payne's gray. I'm going to leave some light areas as well where I had that lighter blue because I really like that color. But I'm mostly just adding some deeper shadows. I really like these deep colors. I'm going to grab a little bit of the turquoise that's in this palette. I think that's really pretty. And some darker brilliant green. Come along the bottom of this rose. And some more of the Payne's gray. I'm just kind of mixing all these colors together. And I want to do all of these dark colors while this is wet so that the edges of them do not show up really dark. So in other words, it's blending. This background is blending all together so prettily. So prettily. Look at that. Oh, so pretty. I love that. shade. Uh-oh, I just dropped paint on myself. The pains of paint. Ah, gonna have to pre-spot that. Okay. Oh, stain removal. It's because I was putting my hand on my palette. Got to see that live. Stain my clothes. Okay, so then I'm just helping the color kind of flow out to the edges, but I'm just not wanting to lose my lightest colors. So I'm just kind of trying to be careful to keep those light greens still there and not lose them. I just want to make sure all the edges look kind of consistent. I don't want any random tide lines. Tide lines are those really harsh edges, and sometimes you use them on purpose, but you don't want them accidentally. If you have them, you want to have purposefully put them there. Okay, so I'm just kind of basically creating a background that looks like you took a photo and it's out of focus in the background. So I'm going to actually grab a tiny bit of black, a little bit of black and a little bit of brilliant green, some of the Payne's gray, which is the one I dropped apparently. A little bit of that one, and I'm going to darken that up a little bit, and I'm just going to drop that in these darkest areas. I think that's probably doesn't even need that. Okay, I'm just going to sweep this around. It just needs a little bit right there. I was wanting a shadow. Okay. And now I'm going to let that dry. Perfect. So that needs to dry for just a couple of minutes. And then we can start pulling in some of those other leaves. So while that's drying, let me see if I missed any comments. Terry says, wow, that rose just popped out. Yeah, it's really amazing how the dark colors make your lightest colors pop. And that's what I wanted to show you guys today. It's really amazing how you can use those values to really bring out color. Now, what I want to do while that's drying, and I can tell you I wish that I'd gone a little darker before I started adding the light colors in the back, but what's amazing is there's some really dark, deep red shadows in the reference photo. So I'm going to grab my crimson, my carmine, and actually a little bit of black, and I've switched to my long round brush again, and I'm just going to use the edge of my brush, and I'm going to try not to do any real harsh lines. I want my lines to be still nice and loose, but I'm just going to go into some of the very center areas of this rose, especially kind of in the middle here, and add a tiny bit of super dark shadow. And I'm going to use my clean wet brush and kind of bring that color out. This would be better to do while this is still wet. I just didn't go that dark with my painting originally. So I'm just going to kind of use a clean wet brush to smooth that shadow out toward the edge a little bit. And I'm just looking for areas where I can pull in a darker shade. The reason I'm pulling in this color is because of how dark this green is. I really don't want that to be the darkest color when my rose is the focal point. So I need to have a little bit darker colors in the center of my rose to make sure it's still the focus of the whole painting. So I'm just kind of using that darker red to bring in those darker colors. And that's still just a mixture of like black and carmine and crimson. I'm just kind of going where I already, now again, I said this before, but you don't want to put dark shadows where you don't already have dark shadows. If you're darkening your shadows, don't add new shadows, just add depth to the shadows that already exist. That's what you want to go for. So I'm just going to add darker areas to the shadows I already have. Now I'm going to use a clean wet brush and kind of smooth those out so the edges aren't so harsh. Just a little bit. It doesn't take much to smooth them. And then again, I'm being really careful not to lose my light spots. I don't want to lose the beautiful light areas that I've already painted. Okay, clean wet brush again. And I'm still just waiting for that background to dry. Okay, and speaking of, that's pretty much ready to paint now. So that rose, you can see how that rose is a lot more crisp now, very pretty. And now I can paint some leaves. So I'm going to grab my big brush. This is still my number 24 round. I'm going to grab a lot of green. So I'm going to grab brilliant green and grass green. I'm just kind of grabbing what I'm thinking of right now. I'm going to grab a little bit of azurite blue and some black. I'm going to make a deep green color. That'll be nice for some petals. And I did trace out the petals ahead of time, but I'm not going to really follow them exactly because they kind of disappeared. So I'm just going to, let me pull this away a little bit more so you guys can see. And I'm going to paint kind of at an angle. I'm going to paint how it feels good to my hand so that my hand can do the brush strokes easily. So starting kind of at the center, I'm just going to bring out some really easy petal shapes. I'm going to let this petal go off the page. Even though we have a margin happening, I think it's kind of cool for the petals to ignore the margin and kind of creep out of the frame. That's kind of fun. And they're not going to be real detailed petals, or leaves, I mean, sorry. So I'm just going to kind of look at the shape of them and just paint the general shadow of that leaf. I'm just kind of getting the outline of it. Like that. And I'm going to do another one. This one's kind of at a weird angle. We'll just kind of paint it as a lighter petal. We'll do another one here, a little bit lighter. And I want this one to be more blue. Just a little bit more blue in it. Your leaves don't all have to be perfect in shape either. I like for them to be a little rough sometimes because rose leaves are a little rough, number one, and they aren't necessarily always intact. Sometimes they're torn, sometimes they've been eaten by bugs, sometimes they're just a little bit warped. So that makes them actually look more realistic when you don't make them totally perfect. I'm going to bring this petal, I want this petal to come around the side of the flower, or sorry, leaf. There we go. Yep, I think that'll do it. So there is my rose for today. Can you guys see that? Yes, there we go. That's all I'm going to do for today. That is the first of many roses to come. Hey, Mama, look at this. Look at this rose. I love it. And that is all I have today. Now I have to clean up my arm. Can you guys see this? This is crazy. Look at my arm. That's what happens when you lay your arm down into your palette. And I picked up, because my little watercolor cake stuck to my arm, it went like that. And then when I picked my arm up, it dropped onto my skirt. So now I'm going to go pre-spot my skirt and get some stain remover. And anyway, I'm going to take a picture of this and post it after I get some journaling. I'll have to let it dry before I do any art journaling on it. But this is really, really fun for me. So if you enjoyed this, please give the video a thumbs up and share it with someone you think would enjoy learning a rose from start to finish. That was really fun. And then stay tuned for the rest of the month of May. We're going to be doing, I mean, I know it's not May yet, but we will. We will be doing some roses. So stay tuned. 4th of May, we'll be doing a lot of them coming up. All right. God bless you guys. Have a really great weekend, and I will see you next time. Bye.